Just imagine for a second. You're living in a different country. Your own home has become a place you're scared of, and everyone you'd normally turn to for help is thousands of miles away. Where do you even begin? This isn't just a hypothetical question. It's the very real story behind a landmark legal case that actually started to redraw the boundaries of justice.
And this was the exact impossible situation Hima Chugh found herself in. After fleeing alleged abuse in the UK, she came back to India hoping the law there could protect her. But there was a massive catch. All the abuse she described happened abroad. And this raised a huge legal question. Could Indian courts even get involved in a case that technically happened on foreign soil?
So let's just quickly look at the timeline here. It all started out pretty straightforward. She got married in Delhi in 2005. Just a week later, she and her husband moved to the UK. But 4 years down the line, she's back in Delhi, staying with her parents. And by 2010, she takes a huge step. She files a case under India's Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. You'd think that would be it, but her legal fight was really just getting started. Right away, she hit a brick wall. The first court and then the appeals court both threw out her case, and the reasoning was pretty black and white. The alleged violence happened in the UK, their home was in the UK, so sorry, Indian courts have no authority, no jurisdiction to get involved. For Hima, it must have felt like every single door was just slamming shut. But she didn't give up. She took her fight all the way to the Delhi High Court. And this right here is where the story gets really interesting. The High Court didn't just give a simple yes or no. Instead, they delivered this unexpected, kind of split decision that would seriously change how this law is understood from then on. So here's the puzzle. The court said, yes, her case against her husband can go forward in Delhi. But at the same time, they dismissed the case against his family, her in-laws. So you've got the same alleged abuse, the same law, but two totally different outcomes. What's going on? To really get this, we have to put ourselves in the judge's shoes. They basically boiled the whole thing down to two core questions. And the answers, it turns out, were hiding in the very specific wording of the law. So let's break it down and tackle them one by one. All right, so the first problem was all about geography. It really comes down to that legal idea we mentioned before, jurisdiction. In other words, did a court in Delhi even have the right to hear a case about things that happened in a totally different country? You can think of jurisdiction as being about power and place. Does this one court in Delhi have the authority to make a legal decision about events that took place in, say, London? Now, the lower courts had already said no, but the High Court, they decided to look way, way closer at the actual text of the law. And this is what they found. Section 27 of the law says a case can be filed where the person aggrieved permanently or temporarily resides. Those two words, temporarily resides, that little phrase, is the key that unlocks this whole first part of the puzzle. The court basically just connected the dots. Hima had left the UK, she was living with her parents in Delhi at the very moment she filed her case. So by definition, she was temporarily residing there. See, it didn't matter that her marital home was in the UK or that the violence allegedly happened there. What mattered was where she was now. And just like that, problem number one was solved. The High Court's ruling was crystal clear. Because the survivor's current location is what matters, the Delhi court did have jurisdiction, so the case against her husband was officially back on the table. But that still left the big question mark about her in-laws. Okay, now for the second part of this puzzle, and this is where we have to zoom in even closer. The issue wasn't about where anymore. Now it was all about who, and a couple of very, very precise definitions buried in the law. So this entire law is designed to protect people who are in what's called a domestic relationship. But the law is incredibly specific about what that means. It's not just about being related. The absolute crucial part is that the two people must have, at some point, lived together in a shared household. The law even defines what a shared household is, and it's basically the home where the people actually lived together in that domestic relationship. This led the court to a really important distinction, the difference between living together and just visiting. So let's break it down. Hima and her husband, they lived together continuously in the UK. That's a clear yes for a shared household. But what about her in-laws? Well, the records showed they only made 2 pretty brief visits, each one lasting about 10 days. So the court had to ask, does that count as living together? And their conclusion was a firm no. The court pointed out that short, casual visits just don't meet the legal definition of living in a shared household. And if there's no shared household, then legally there was no domestic relationship between Hima and her in-laws. which means the Domestic Violence Act simply couldn't be applied to them. Okay, so after all that legal deep dive, what's the big picture here? What does this one specific ruling actually mean for other people out there in similar situations? Why does this case matter so much? Well, it really boils down to two super important principles. First, and this is huge, where you are now is what matters. A survivor can seek legal protection from wherever they are currently living, even if it's temporary. Geography is not a barrier. And second, who you live with matters. The law is specific. It's designed to protect people you've actually lived with in a shared home, which isn't always the same as all your family members.
So the Hima Chugh case gave us some really important answers, but it also opens up a much, much bigger conversation. You know, as more of us live and build families that cross countries and even continents, it forces us to ask a really important question. Are our laws actually keeping up with the reality of our modern borderless lives? It's definitely something to think about.